Can't find it. Thank you so much, Mo. Appreciate it.
No
Okay, great.
problem.
We are actually recording now. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this educational workshop, Rule of Trees. This will be a guide to the ordinances and codes that dictate how street and private trees are maintained within the city of Napa. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few things for the protocol for Zoom. If everyone can mute themselves, and I also can mute people as well, just to make sure we're not going to have any background noise interrupting us. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box, which if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen on a laptop, you should see the chat option and you can click that and a box will open on the right-hand side of your screen. Mo and I will be going through the chats to see if any questions you have. Feel free there. This is going to be a pretty small group. So if you guys have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them as well. You will have to unmute yourself. There will be time at the end for questions as well. And I know a couple people have submitted questions, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation as well. So this is the introductory period, and then we have a bunch of prepared questions that I will be asking Jeff. So this is kind of like an interactive thing with Jeff and I about common questions that people might ask about tree ordinances or who's supposed to maintain what within the city of Napa. And then after that, we will again ask the questions that people had asked previously, and if anyone has any questions today. And like I mentioned before, we are recording this presentation and it will be available on both the City of Napa's website and the Napa RCD's website as well. So I never actually introduced myself. My name is Lisa. I'm a senior project manager with the Napa County Resource Conservation District. The Napa RCD is a non-regulatory agency that works throughout Napa County. And although we do a lot, it boils down to we help people care for the land, water, soil, and wildlife throughout the county. This presentation is brought to you through our U.S. Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Grant and the City of Napa's CAL FIRE grant that supports their urban forestry management plan. And we're joined today by two City of Napa Parks and Recreation staff. Jeff Gittings is the City of Napa's Parks and Urban Forestry Manager, and Woody Hederman is the Urban Forestry Supervisor. We also have Mo Biro, who is the Community Engagement Project Manager for the Napa RCD, and she will also be helping with any Spanish translation tonight. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, this format will be kind of like an interview with me asking commonly asked questions or issues to the City of Napa Parks and Recreation staff. And then we will be going over questions at the end. Can everyone see the presentation? You can just nod if you can see it. Perfect. Thank you. These are the people who are here who will be talking, just in case you want to write our names down for some reason. And we'll get started with the first question. So, Jeff, what is the difference between a public tree, a street tree, and a private tree?
And good question, Lisa. And thank you. I see a lot of familiar faces, some I don't know as well. Thank you for attending tonight. Lisa, very common question we get. What is the difference between these three trees? And we have some images here to help out, but probably the easiest way to decipher the three trees is public trees are really those trees that are gonna live on a park or a publicly owned parcel or a plaza. Um, a street tree is defined by our Muni Code 12.44 as a tree that in general lives between a curb and a sidewalk, so in a planter strip. So Lisa's pointing that out there with the cursor. And then a private tree, for most of your suburban residential neighborhoods are going to be any trees behind the sidewalk, or obviously on a larger parcel, any tree within the private parcel. Um, I also want to just point out quickly, with this somewhat smaller group, happy to kind of stop and answer questions as we go. There's a nice function at the bottom. It's under reactions. You can raise your hand. So I'd be happy to call on people. But again, Lisa's going to go over questions. You're also welcome to put them in the chat as well.
Great. We'll move on to the next question. Are there any restrictions that guide where a tree can be planted?
Yeah, another good question. Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Most of our restrictions we have within the city are going to be around what is that street tree. So the street tree, the one between the curb and the sidewalk. So the city, although those trees are owned by the adjacent property owner, the city has jurisdiction over them through a municipal code. And the Parks and Recreation Department specifically has the jurisdiction over the planting of those trees. So we have a lot of guidelines and information around street trees, their type, their placement, etc. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about those. So we currently carry what we call our master street tree list. And this is a list of trees that are acceptable to be planted in those planter strips. That list has been a list that the city has used to guide its planting for years. We recently just updated that list through our Parks and Rec Commission a few months ago with additional information we received from the CAL FIRE Urban Forestry Management grant that we did a survey on all of our street trees. So we just updated that. In addition to that, that master street tree list is broken up into various categories, 1 through 4. And really what those categories serve to do is to determine the right mature size tree for the right space that we have. So for example, and an easy one for everybody to probably digest is a valley oak is on our master street tree list. But if you have a small planter, that is not a category tree that will be allowed in that planter just because we know that that tree will get very large. Redwood's also a good example. Versus when you get down into those smaller planters, our categories have smaller stature trees to better fit those planter strips. The goal with this is really that we want to plant the right tree in the right place to allow that tree to fully mature in its life cycle so that when it's planted, it has all the opportunities it can have to get to its full size without having conflicts with curb, sidewalk, utilities, etc. In addition to the street tree planting list that we have that governs the types of trees based on the size of the planter strips, we also have some restrictions around where trees can be planted in those planter strips. So for example, we plant trees a certain distance away from utilities to avoid utility conflicts. We also plant trees a certain distance away from, say a driveway or something like that. And then we also in another code through our public works department, there's a zone of influence on the corner of the street so that as you're trying to pull your car out, you can actually see oncoming cars or pedestrians. So we use that zone of influence also to govern where and how we plant trees on the corner of streets as well. Probably lastly, when it comes to street tree planting, it does require a permit to do so. So if someone is looking to add a tree or replace a tree, we do have an application for that. And I believe we're going to go over that a little bit more later in the presentation. But
Yep.
anyways.
Jumping the
So
gun, Jeff.
there we go. And I
Yeah,
didn't even
next
remember
question.
that actually. I knew it was in there. I just didn't know it was the next one.
Yes. Yeah. So if somebody wanted to plant a tree, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so this is I'll go over what is your current option. It's also something that we're really excited about that we're trying to offer a new program that we've never had at the City of Napa, and I'll touch on that after I kind of go through what is the process. Um, so specifically, if you wanted to or didn't have a street tree in front of your residence or business, and you were just looking to add a tree, the way to go about that would be to go to our website, and there's a link there for a street tree application. You'd fill out that application. Yeah, there we go, Lisa. So you've got it there. If you scroll down, keep going down on the right there, you're going to see right below the street tree removal. Keep going down a little bit more. Um, Tree planting application right there, 2.25, just above your cursor there. Um,
Oh, wrong
oh,
one.
I think we're on. So tree planting application up two more, Lisa. One
There
more.
we go.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Yeah. So these applications are available at our main office at 1500 Jefferson as well. You can also go online and fill this application out. So really not a lot of information that's needed. This application gets filled out. It comes over to staff. There is a fee. A bit of a nominal fee as compared to what it costs to buy all these items, but there's a fee in there. And really the goal of the fee is not to make money on this program at all. It's just to recoup some of the costs, the administrative costs. So fill out this application. This application comes into our department. Actually, Woody, the supervisor, handles the majority of these applications. We'll go out, we will take a look at the site, confirm the size of the planter area, the number of trees. You can request more than one tree in this application. We'll confirm that the number of trees you requested will fit. And if there's more opportunities there, we may suggest it to you that there are more opportunities. What we will then do is if you scroll down to the bottom of that application, Lisa, it'll say that the categories there, 1, 2, 3, 4. What we do is we go ahead and decide what category is the right size tree for the location that's being asked. And then we send information back to you with the street tree list, and you're able to choose a species based on that category or multiple species, depending on how many trees you're planning to plant. Once we receive that information, our staff will then order the tree and we will deliver the tree to your home with the materials that you need to plant the tree. And then the tree is then planted by you or somebody that can help you. We provide 15-gallon trees. So they're about the size of a bucket. So we're not talking really giant trees here. And then we'll also provide you with some educational information about how to plant the tree and what materials. So specifically to our code, we have 2 riser pipes that we like people to put on the side of their tree. We fill those with gravel, and then those are places for you to water that tree. We also include a guide for how to care for that young tree. I saw a question pop up, Lisa.
Yes, there's a couple of questions. One of them is this application electronic, or do you have to print it out and mail it into the Parks and Rec department?
Currently, we do not have an electronic option, although we just got an electronic option for our picnic rentals through our recreation department. So we are working towards creating an electronic option for this. Although we do want to maintain the option to drop it off or print it out or fill it out because people do seem to use that as well. Um, I guess keep going with the questions. I'm
Yes.
seeing a few popping up here.
Are you allowed to have more than one application per year, or is there a limit?
The limit is really not about the applications. The limit is about the number of trees that will fit at the property that we're discussing. So one good point that I may have not pointed out is that these applications do need to come from the property owner. So if you are a renter, it doesn't mean that you can't be a part of this program. You just need to have the property owner sign the application. So really, if you owned 50 properties in Napa and you wanted a tree at every one, this would be an option for you to do.
And somebody asked, can you request a larger tree if you're willing to pay more? But I'm assuming it has to do with just the size of the area that you can plant.
Yeah, so we are governed by the these funds, and this application is governed by our master fee list that is set annually by our city council. So we really don't have a mechanism currently to say, hey, a little bit more money buys you a little bit bigger tree. We also have found over years of doing this program that this program is not the city replanting the trees. This is that resident or a landscaper that the resident hires or a friend or whoever that may be. And so really these 15-gallon trees are manageable for people versus a larger tree that is just really becomes a little bit too much for most people. In fact, we oftentimes when they get that large, they're difficult for us to move. So we stick with 15-gallon for this program.
And somebody asked if you have a sidewalk but no like planter box or area to plant, is there a program to help remove the sidewalk or how does that work?
We don't get that request very often. There is mechanisms that would allow for that. We do have a sidewalk cost share program that has a mechanism for, it's mostly built for dealing with damaged sidewalk. So if somebody has some damaged sidewalk, and a lot of times that can be associated with a tree, that program is set up to help residents, and it will pay up to 50% of those repairs to have the sidewalk repaired. And if there's an associated tree that's damaging the sidewalk, as well as the tree removal or root shaving or whatever's happening in that situation. I have not seen that program used specifically for that question. So I wouldn't be able to answer 100% whether it can or cannot. Residents, however, could go ahead and get an encroachment permit to remove a square of sidewalk, and then theoretically go through our street tree replacement program to get a tree that way. So there is maybe not the smoothest mechanism, but there is a mechanism to do that if that's an option.
I think the last question so far is how many applications does the city get in a typical year? And has it varied over the years?
Well, Woody, maybe you can help me out with that one. I thought we talked about that the other day. They definitely come in waves. Um,
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, they definitely come in waves, but it's consistent through the year. Throughout the year, it's pretty consistent. Lately, we're getting a lot of single resident applications for plantings, but they're requesting like multiple trees. Like I have a couple applications sitting here on my desk. Three of them are requesting four trees. I've gone to the site, I evaluated it, determined the size, the category of the tree that could be. They've selected it, and now we're currently just waiting on our grower to send us a shipment so we can deliver those trees to them. So I would probably say in a calendar year, I'd probably say it's close between somewhere between 60 to 100.
Oh,
and
I would.
we could pull that information. I just don't have it right in front of me.
I think people are just curious to know, like
Yeah,
how many trees are getting planted every year. Good
we
questions.
we buy a lot. We do buy a lot. I know that.
Nice.
And then lastly, on the if you want to plant a tree, we are currently working with our CD as well on a pilot program that would eliminate the fee for street trees. We're trying to cobble together the amount of funding that we can to try to see how long that program can last. So definitely look out for that. That's something we want to try to launch here in the new year, a pilot program that would allow for free street trees as well as trees that could be planted on private property as well. We haven't done that before, and we'd like to understand whether that fee is a barrier or not for these applications.
Great. I'm going to move on to the next
Perfect.
question. You kind of touched base on this a little bit earlier, but are there limits to what trees can be planted?
Yes, specifically for the street trees, there are, and you have the link to the master street tree list. So I did touch on that. I won't reiterate that too much, but there's a little example of your categories, and you'll see the size of the cutouts or the size of the space that's needed. One point of note is, yeah, with or without power lines, is a key. We do still have a lot of neighborhoods that have overhead lines, and everyone around town sees the pruning around those power lines. And so in those areas, we have those shorter stature trees to be planted. Um, we utilize this list uh, fairly extensively in our park system in replanting. However, we are able to generally plant larger species in our park system because we have the space. So we'll stick with those where we can. We will stick with those category 1 and larger trees when we do plantings in the parks. But there are spaces that we have, planter strips, if you will, in parks that we will utilize some of these smaller stature trees as well. This list is also a guide for developers as well when they're doing developments and doing replanting along planter strips there in front of the development.
And this is the updated one that you were mentioning earlier?
This is, yeah, if this link was grabbed off the website, yes, this has been updated.
Okay. I don't see a date on here, and I think the other one had a date. So the older
Okay.
one. So I think this is the new one. And somebody asked, are there specific trees that are allowed public versus street trees? Are there any species that you're focused on?
Well, good question. So we've learned so much more than we really ever knew. I don't want to speak too much about the individuals that were before me. But what we learned with our inventory was really the quantity and the variety of species that we have in the city. And really the industry rule is that you really want to maintain a level of 10% or less of a specific species. And that's really done so that if there were a pest, you know, the oak tree is susceptible to a pest right now. So if you have more than 10%, say if you had 20% of your species as one species, and you were to have a specific pest that came in that killed that species, you could then lose up to 20% of your urban forestry right off the bat. So really that sweet spot is that 10%. So we use that to update this list. And then what we will continue to do is to continue to do inventories, hopefully on about a 7-year cycle, and adjust this list as those species start to get to that 10%. Live oak's a good one. It's still on this list, but it's at 9.5%. So, it's one that might end up actually coming off at some point.
So this is a dynamic list then.
It is a dynamic list, and it should be that way.
And for public trees, I'm assuming there really isn't any, like the city doesn't have any authority to dictate that.
For private trees?
That's what I meant. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. But to answer both of those questions, from a public tree perspective, we do not have specific guidelines for ourselves as to what trees we can and cannot plant in parks. That's done purposely so that we can utilize those spaces to try out species as well that we may think we may want to use. But for private trees, other than any tree that's subject to our private tree code 12.45, we do not have private tree requirements unless it's associated with the development. If it is associated with a development, then we do have the ability to review those development applications and make suggestions on trees that would truly be planted on private property. We will always provide education but no necessary requirement currently.
This next question isn't really associated with what we're talking about, but it's a good question because I know you guys had worked with Davy Resources on a tree inventory.
Yes.
And someone is asking if that inventory is publicly available, if people wanted to view it.
It is it's a web based, so it is publicly viewable. It's not something that we have promoted at this point because we are still trying to we will promote it probably within the year as an access, but what we haven't determined is how we will want that system to work. So you can see it as a guest. It is a web based. We've used it in some of our presentations, and I can share that as well. But we it has a lot of capabilities that software does. And so it's part of our urban forestry management plan is to look at some of the recommendations that Davey gets us about how other agencies have shared that information. So anyways, with that being said, Lisa, I'd be happy to pass that along after the meeting and we can share that with participants.
Okay, somebody's just asking for the link to the tree list. I'm going to provide that. Great. And then we will go on to the next question. If a tree is blocking the sidewalk, so through its roots, what can I do to fix it?
So a couple different scenarios I could see here. We have requirements, height requirements for the roadway and height requirements for the sidewalk. So 7 foot of vertical clearance on the sidewalk. I think what we're trying to talk here is about the sidewalk damaging the concrete, but I think it's a good opportunity to talk about the other options that do occur. If it's and this is kind of a blanket statement. If anyone is out there and they see a street tree or a tree that's a hazard, they're going to want to let us know in our department as soon as they can. If it's an imminent hazard, that's what we have 911, of course, if it really rose to that level, or we have a non-emergency dispatch number. We have a 24/7 standby staff in our Parks and Urban Forestry department. So if there's any time you see a hazard, definitely make that phone call. If you see work out there that you think needs to be done, we have a service center, My Service Center. There's an easy to use app on your phone. It's also through our website. That's a good way to get work into our system. Because what people may not know is that we may be doing work in there shortly there after that complaint comes in. But more specific to this question, if there's a tree blocking the sidewalk, what can I do to fix it? I think this situation occurs mostly with trees uplifting sidewalks or curbs. And I encourage you to get in touch with us as soon as you can with those things. So through our service center is a great way. And really the reason behind that is so that we can determine whether there is work that's going to happen in that area or whether it's something that needs to be addressed right away. A lot of times these are somewhat minor offsets and they may not need to be addressed immediately, but sometimes they can be immediate situations. So do reach out to us through our service center is the best way to do that. What we'll do is we'll be able to take a look at that. We'll be able to communicate with our public works department. So if there's a project that's coming to that area that we're going to repair that sidewalk, or that sidewalk's on a list to be repaired, or that tree's on a list to be removed, or whatever that answer might be, or that area might get a new ADA ramp, reaching out to us is the best thing to do. We can then let you know whether there's work planned. If there is not work planned in that area right away or immediately, we can let you know generally how long until the city will be there to do repairs. There is also a mechanism for people to repair that sidewalk on their own and deal with the tree. And that's really what I was talking to about the cost share program. So that would be an opportunity for residents to go ahead and address that on their own as well. A lot of times what we see happening is that the application will come in as a tree removal application. Um, and Woody will get that application. We'll go ahead and review it, and we will then send that over to the cost share program. And here's really the reasoning behind that, and a big reason why I think this is really a great meeting and something that a lot of people can take away from is that um, although the tree may be causing the sidewalk issue, in order to remove the tree and address the sidewalk issue, you really have to remove the sidewalk so you can grind those roots there, put a sidewalk back, and then be able to replace the tree. So it's not a wrong answer to put in an application for removal, but oftentimes we'll be sending that over to the cost share program because the two are really married together.
Is there a specific amount for the cost share, or because you had mentioned 50/50
It
before,
is
or that
it's up to 50%,
up to 50?
and up to until the funds get exhausted. I have not seen the funds get exhausted yet. So at this point, I don't want to speak too much on that as it's public works program, but that program has been available since I've worked here and has not gone away at any time.
Great. And the next question in the chat is actually the next question that we have is, how do I get a permit to trim or prune a tree, both below the roots, both below, which would be the roots, or above ground?
Very similar to the way that you would request a new tree. We have an application for a street tree pruning, which includes root pruning. So if you send in that application, you can specify what so it'd be the
Big tree? No. This one?
tree removal and pruning application. Correct. So you just in that application, you fill that out, you specify what it is you're sending the application in for, whether it be a removal or a pruning. It oftentimes with pruning, because we have the street tree inventory, we're able to really process those really quickly, and we want to. So we'll process those and send those right back out because we know the need for the pruning. So yeah, just right there you have it, whether it be root pruning, removal, or branch pruning, just identify that in your application.
Go back to the presentation. I added photos, but I think they should have been at the previous question of like there's branches blocking the sidewalk or the whole tree falls. Like that's something that they would call the center for the city to help remove.
Yeah, definitely the photo on the right. Absolutely. Please give us a call as soon as you can. The photo on the left, actually a private tree, but the city still has the jurisdiction where if that's a hazard to the public, we can go ahead and prune that back as well.
Okay, so that's a good clarification that this would only be this between the curb and the sidewalk, that would be a street tree, and that's where you would have to get a permit to prune it. But since this is more on the private property, but it's overhanging and blocking the sidewalk, that's something that the city would help maintain because it's blocking access.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Not something that a resident could not do, but definitely something if we're aware of, we'll go out. I mean, it's typically in that situation, it's pretty minor. It's probably not a really large limb. It's mostly kind of what you're showing in your photo there.
Mm-hmm.
Some loppers and or a pole saw, and you're probably there.
Great. We do have some questions in the chat. Does the city prune street trees? And if so, can we request that?
Yes, we do prune street trees. Yes, you can request that. This happens very, very often when we see pruning applications or we get inquiries about pruning. We do prune street trees. However, we do have a pretty set schedule. So we're throughout the year, we're working closely with our public works department in various neighborhoods, and we're doing prunings and removals and root shaving and stump grinding and replacements. And so we can't always pull off of that work to go prune a tree. So oftentimes we're just really open and honest with the residents or the business owners, and we say, yeah, the city can come prune it. However, we may be 6, 8, 12 months out before we're actually getting over there. And oftentimes residents will choose to turn in the application and do the pruning on their own. So that's generally how that works. But again, that really all starts with reaching out and turning an application. But and there's times too where we'll receive an application. We know we're going to that neighborhood next week, and we will let those residents know, and we'll refund their money for their application since we already know we're going to be in the area.
Awesome. Another question is, are there other options that can be considered to save mature trees that say the roots are coming up in the sidewalk? So you would do like a sidewalk bump out, or is the only option to do a tree removal?
No, there are lots of options that we have used throughout the years. So we've narrowed sidewalks around trees. We've shaved roots. I think probably the biggest point that I want to get across to everybody is that we can all look at a sidewalk and see a tree nearby, and we can assume that it's always the tree root. But really, we do not tend to make that determination until we've actually removed that concrete, because it's really common that we've seen other issues causing the sidewalk issues, not necessarily the tree. Um, so we have a policy that we're working to update, which is a street tree removal policy. And it's really just a framework for how we look at a tree for potential removal. And it'd be the same process when a resident or business owner turns in an application for a removal. We perform the same process. We look at the tree, we inspect it, we see what other options are available. I won't get into details of what that looks like, but really the very first thing we're doing is just an assessment on the health of the tree. So there's a lot of variables that go along there. You may have a completely undisrupted sidewalk, but a really rotten, unhealthy tree that needs to be removed, or vice versa. You could have a really offset sidewalk that has a really healthy tree that can handle some root shaving, and then we'll go with that process and replace the sidewalk. So it really does depend. We're talking about living, kind of breathing items here. So there's not one size necessarily fits all, but there's a good solid framework for taking a look at these trees.
People are excited that it's always not always just the tree roots that are causing the sidewalk to be turned out. I didn't know that either. I always just assumed if you see a messed up sidewalk that was from a root of a tree, but I guess that's not always the case.
No, not always. We'll see, one of probably the most common ones is, especially in the kind of the older neighborhoods where your utilities, your water line or your sewer line comes into your house. That developer did a really bad job of compacting the earth under there, and you'll see
Hmm.
settlement, which will cause that sidewalk to drop on one end and kind of lift on another. May not be associated with a tree, but anyways, yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Are there any companies that the city recommends to prune trees?
Well, unfortunately, we cannot give, it would be favoritism to give out contractors names throughout to city residents. I will say there are a lot of reputable contractors around. There's plenty of good places, Yelp, there's plenty of great places you can look up, ISA. I would make sure that they have trained arborists on staff. That's my one suggestion to everybody, is make sure that they have some qualified trained people. And they should be able to give you references of work that they've done before. No different than searching a contractor to do your roof, or a concrete contractor, or really any of those things. Those businesses that have done this for a while are going to be reputable, and they're going to be happy to hand out uh, references of work that they've done. I would also say that, it's a good question to ask a contractor, are you familiar with the rules and regulations about tree work within the city? And if that contractor doesn't know those items, then it may be a good opportunity to call someone else and ask them as well. Because I look at them like a plumber, an electrician. When we hire them, we expect them to be the experts and know the codes. The same should be expected of tree workers as well.
You mentioned ISA. Can you define what that is?
International Society of Arborists. So that's kind of the governing body of tree work and arboriculture throughout the United States.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I will mention that, sometimes when people are pruning trees, they can also do it incorrectly, which can damage the health of the tree. So that's why it is really good, like Jeff was mentioning, to make sure you get somebody who knows how to trim a tree properly. And usually the certified arborist is a good call on that.
Yeah, Maureen, good point. Saw that.
Okay, there's one question in the chat. I'm just gonna wait till the end, which I think is a good idea.
Okay.
Are utility companies allowed to prune street trees? And how would one go about pruning trees within utility lines?
Saved the best for last, didn't you, Lisa? Uh, Utility companies, I mean, I would specifically PG&E, I think is what we're mainly talking about here. I am not, I wouldn't want to speak for AT&T or Pac Bell. I believe they carry similarities, but I haven't had a lot of dealings with them. They're mostly just for anecdotal purposes. The bigger, heavier black lines on your overhead lines that are lower are going to be your communications, your Pac Bells, your AT&Ts. Typically, those are not the ones that are really affected by trees. They can be, but I think really specific to PG&E. PG&E does have the ability to prune street trees, prune and remove street trees. The Public Utilities Commission of California gave them the ability to do that outside to work really kind of outside of city jurisdiction rules. So they are able to kind of work around some of our city rules. They're not able to work around encroachment permits, so we still require them to have encroachment permits when they're doing work. But oftentimes, yes, they will go out. I will say that over the last few years, we have been working a lot closer with PG&E. They've been really improving their communication with us. They do provide us. They have a veg division. They do provide us with an outlook on where they're going to work. And I will say, when it comes to an emergency situation in a storm, they do respond rather quickly. We are unable to work within 10 feet of energized lines. So if there's a limb or a tree that fails and falls on those lines, obviously call 911, call dispatch, let us know right away. Private tree, public tree, either way, that's a public hazard. But we're not able to do those work. So oftentimes we're relying on our dispatch center to call PG&E, and PG&E is dispatching out their tree worker crews to deal with that. If we're to do the work on those, we need to have in writing from PG&E that they've de-energized that line, just so we know that our staff is going into a safe situation.
I will mention that I have called PG&E because there was trees near a power line, and if you call them, they have like a vegetation line, and they'll take you straight to that person, and they can turn off the power to that specific line if you know like the pole number, and you can have somebody come out and then prune the tree yourself, whatever's touching the lines. But yeah, PG&E is always a good place to start with when you're dealing with power lines.
And then the second part of that question, yes, you can make requests through their veg line. They have a veg hotline. They also have an email on the PG&E website if you are requesting pruning around utilities or around your drop, which is the line that would come down to your house.
Great. Oh, did it move now? Let's try that. There we go. Okay. We've kind of gone over this a little bit, but
Sure.
I'll ask it again. Or maybe just a reminder to people if they see a potentially hazardous tree in the public right of way or in a park or on private property, what should they do?
Let us know as soon as you can. Let us know as soon as you can. There's 1,000 different scenarios that happen here after you let us know, but letting us know is really the first thing. And I will say that I've been a part of a lot of emergency wind events, and oftentimes people will overemphasize what is maybe a little tiny 2-inch tree as a hazard, but then I've seen it the other way where, people will call and say it's a tiny little tree and it's a really big tree. So, um, during work hours, if it's not an emergency, feel free to call our main office. That's on our website. That's an easy thing to do. Call another department. They'll transfer you over. They have staff cell phone numbers. They'll call staff right away. We'll get somebody out there to look at it. After hours, anytime after 5 p.m., call a non-emergency dispatch line if it's not really deemed emergency. Of course, if it's emergency, call 911. That's what we have dispatchers do. Like I said before, we have 24-hour standby every day of the year. So get that information over to us. The faster you can, the better we can avoid some kind of issue that could occur from that tree. And we have 3 trained arborists on staff, so they'll be happy to come take a look at the tree, and they may see things that we didn't, whether that be in a park or a street, anywhere that you think this could be a hazard to the public, let us know right away.
We have a few more questions
Sure.
on our slideshow, and then we can move to some other questions. I just want to give people a heads up. Who is responsible for removing weeds in the right of way? So like if you have between the sidewalk and the curb.
Yeah. So the vegetation other than trees between the sidewalk and the curb is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to maintain.
Good to know. Okay. Are there any codes or restrictions imposed by the city on private trees? What about significant trees or protected native trees?
Yeah, we have 2 mini codes, 12.44, which governs street trees. And then we have another code, 12.45, which governs over private trees. And the private trees, the 12.45, which is the private trees, has really 2 specific categories. One is significant trees, and then the other one is protected native trees. I could talk for hours on this one, so I'll try to make this kind of as clear and understanding for everybody. Protected native trees, which are those species you have right in front of you that are also of that size, so they need to be that size or greater. They also need to be on a parcel that is 1 acre or greater. So if anyone's going to do work on those trees on that private parcel, they need to obtain a permit from the city, whether it be pruning or removal. They should at least be reaching out to the city. If you're pruning less than 10% of the canopy, you do not need a permit, but it's better to be asking the city first so that we're on the up and up with things. That way, if you did need a permit, you had one. If you're seeking a removal, this does have a pretty significant replacement requirement unless the tree is deemed a hazard. So probably about as far as I'll take it, but I mean, just the takeaway, any of those species there you see of that size or greater on a parcel 1 acre, they are subject to the the protected native tree code. The second part of that code is significant tree, and there's not a lot of those throughout the city. We have about 40 or so. Significant trees are trees that are deemed significant by resolution from city council. So you need to turn in an application for a significant tree that's reviewed by staff. A staff report needs to be created, and it needs to be approved through resolution by city council. Anyone that has a significant tree on their property probably knows about it. But we do have a registry online that you can find. But if you do have a significant tree and a lot of information was given to you, you do need permits to do pruning and removal on that tree as well.
And the next question is also about removing or pruning trees that are private, but we did have a question about a clarifying question. So what category is this? The protected native
That's the
trees.
protected native tree, yes.
Yeah, that one is only relevant to parcels that are over An acre, correct?
1 acre or larger, correct?
So if
Yes.
it's smaller, these trees aren't really protected.
Not subject to that code, correct?
Okay. Is there any other code that protects trees on the less than 1 acre parcel?
Not unless it's associated with a development
Okay,
or it's a street tree.
great.
So your typical suburban house, large oak tree in the front yard, even if it meets this criteria, does not require a permit from the city to do work on that tree.
Okay. So if you were going to go about pruning a tree or move a private tree, are there any restrictions for that, or do you have to get a permit, or is it again the parcel size?
Yeah, if it's a significant tree, yes, you need to seek a permit through the department. If it's a tree that's subject to the protected native, so a tree that is a certain species of a certain size on a parcel of an acre or more, yes, you need a permit for that. Outside of that, so a deodar cedar, a pine tree, any type Monterey pine, even if it's on an acre or more, no permit needed. It needs to be that specific species.
Got it. Great. So that's all the questions that we had for our interview section. I'm going to switch to the questions that people had asked when they registered, and then I'll go back to the remaining questions in the chat. So don't worry, I do see those.
Perfect.
Okay, so somebody asked, what changes are needed for tree codes and ordinances to be consistent with the general plan's new policy, CCS 1-1?
I don't know that I know that code off the top of my head. I would be happy. I would need to look into that code a little bit more before, but I would be happy, Lisa, if you you sent that to me in an email, I'd be happy to email you back and get that question out. And if we want to disseminate, we can. I don't know that code well enough to speak to that right now.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we can work on getting the
I know my
information.
code, but not the general plan code. It's too many pages. I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top
Yeah,
of my
there's a lot of codes, hard to know them all.
head.
Somebody asked from a climate standpoint, a 1-to-1 tree replacement ratio isn't enough and loss of shade canopy is a concern. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a complicated question with a complicated answer, but I will do my best to and I think the answer to that is it does depend. So a 1-to-1 ratio in generality, if you're removing mature trees and you're putting non-mature trees, will not maintain your canopy. So if you're taking out a 200-year-old oak tree and you're putting back 1-to-1, you're not going to be maintaining your canopy. I think when we specifically talk about street trees, oftentimes we are really governed by the amount of space that we have in that planter strip. And so sometimes a 1-to-1 ratio is all that we can achieve. Sometimes it's not achievable. Particularly when we go into neighborhoods, and you look at like corner lots, for example. Oftentimes a corner lot will have 4 trees, right? They'll have 2 kind of right on the corner and then 2 set back on the edges of the house. Well, with our new requirements for ADA ramps and the size of them, it's not uncommon that those 2 closer trees need to be removed in order to put in an ADA ramp. And then you're left with lack of space or smaller space to do that 1-to-1 ratio. What we know from the information we've gathered in the urban forestry management plan is that 75% of our canopy is on private property. And the city really only has jurisdiction over about 18% of what is available to be plantable throughout the city. And then if you remove the majority of that 18%, which is really parkland, you're left with not really as much space in those planter strips for tree replacement. And so from the city's perspective and what we're learning is that we alone cannot be able to make up for losses on private property. So we need to go ahead and really look to those private properties to maintain our canopy because we know really that's where 3/4 of it lives. So the 1-to-1 ratio is, I don't even know that I necessarily answered the question exactly. The 1-to-1, it can be a goal depending on the situation if you're in. If we're in a large park, a 1-to-1 ratio, it's easy to achieve a 5-to-1, a 3-to-1 ratio. When we're talking about street trees and projects in the right of way, a 1-to-1 ratio may be the maximum that we can achieve.
I think that was a good answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
Somebody also asked, what proactive measures is the City of Napa taking to identify gaps in the street tree spaces in our downtown neighborhoods?
Well, we do a proactive measure. I will say a lot of this information is frankly fairly new to us in a government agency. So up until about a year ago, really our information about where our gaps were mostly anecdotal. We didn't really have the data to know that. We do now know that, but I think really the answer to that question is it depends on the lens in which you look through. So if we're saying a gap of canopy in a neighborhood, we're looking at the neighborhood and we're not distinguishing between private and public land. We're just saying this neighborhood has X number of canopy. So if we're looking through that lens, the outcome of that may be that there is sufficient canopy or above average canopy in that area, even though there may be not one street tree at all. I mean, there are neighborhoods that have curb adjacent and have no street trees and may have really high canopy. So I think it really depends on the lens in which you look through. But to answer the question more specifically about what the city is doing proactively, I think we've touched on that a little bit with the programs that we're trying to work through, which are trying to break down some of those barriers for planting, for individuals planting. Proactively, if we get an application for a street tree removal, we do not approve that removal without a plan for replanting if that's possible. So that's a proactive measure that we take. If we're doing a project, whether it be a capital project or an internal sidewalk project, reforestation is always incorporated into those projects. We have not gotten to a point, and I'm not sure that we necessarily have the resources to get there either, but we have not gotten to a point to where we have been able to address some of these planting deficiencies. I will say from the information that we have, the lowest canopy areas do not tend to be in the downtown area. They tend to be more in the north and the eastern portion of the city.
And I will ask that because people were talking about it in the chat that there's some areas where you have power lines or there is no gaps between the sidewalk and the curb. So, we can't necessarily plant in those areas. So the city would also be limited to not being able to plant there, but then private owners would be able to focus on their property more.
Correct.
So
yeah, it is dynamic.
Yes, you have to, I think we all have to work together to achieve the canopy. It can't just be the city or just private landowners.
Yes, Lisa, correct.
And then there's another question about how can the public advocate for stronger linkages between public works, active transportation project, and trees in the right of way?
I think, sharing the programs that we already have, and I think a good example of that is our street tree planting program. I think another great example of that is our cost share program. I'm not saying it's surprising to me, but I think some of these opportunities, I'm always a little surprised when I hear people say, "Oh, you have a program for me to get a street tree and get it planted." And I wish that weren't the case. But really, I think sharing that information with those that are interested is probably the most helpful thing that individuals can do. I will say, second to that, the city has really put a lot of effort into communicating out these projects. So we've had several meetings with the public about upcoming public works projects. Attending those, or if you can't attend them, send in your questions. That's really helpful. Those meetings are really intended to get the perspective of the public, maybe even more specifically, those that live in that neighborhood as well. So look out for those meetings, attend those meetings. That information is really, really valuable. We hold those meetings because we want to know what the community wants to see in those projects. We may not be able to do everything that the community wants in those projects, but knowing that is really helpful for us to prioritize where those funds are used.
Great. I'm going to try to go through, we are at the limit, but there's still more questions in the chat. So if people want to hang out and
Yeah.
Jeff and Woody, if you guys still have time, we can go through
Yeah.
some of those questions.
Happy to stay on for a few more minutes. No problem.
Great. Somebody asked, what are the most difficult aspects of managing Napa's urban forest?
What is the most difficult aspect? Oh, maybe I've been doing it too long. I don't know.
It's also easy.
I think probably the most challenging thing I come across is probably a topic that I touched on before, which is it's hard. It's really difficult to determine, specifically with tree and sidewalk conflicts. Everybody wants to go to the answer, but it's really like exploratory surgery every time we look at a tree and a sidewalk issue. Yes, there are some that are very, very clear and you can see it. And I know everybody that's walked around town sees the tree that's really 10 times bigger than the planter that's there. But for the most part, I think it's really hard for people to understand that sometimes we really need to look into these things to make sure that we're making the right decision, and we oftentimes just don't have the information. So, other than that, I think the other most challenging thing is just limited resources. So we have 6 full-time people on staff, 35,000 trees that are in the public area. And so trying to be most efficient and use those funds that are provided by the taxpayers in the most equitable way that we can is probably the biggest challenge. And it's just an umbrella challenge that we deal with every day.
Thanks. Somebody was wondering if realtors know about the street tree program or the ordinances or codes. Are they aware of it, or is it mostly just contractors?
I do receive phone calls from realtors. It does happen. That's something that I'd love to spend more time educating. I think that would be a worthwhile, because it's not uncommon that those realtors are soliciting contractors to do work. It's not a resource that I've tapped into maybe as much as I should have. But they do call. It definitely, realtors, they do their research for sure. So they give us calls, they ask questions. So yeah, I don't know, Woody, you can jump in, but I know you get, at least a couple calls a month from realtors. Oh, you might have to put your mic down, Woody. We're having a hard time hearing you.
No, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, we get several calls a month at least from realtors.
Okay. Linda had a bunch of questions, but she had to jump off, so
Okay.
maybe she can email us later.
Yeah.
Somebody did ask, is there a plan for planting trees in Westwood?
Westwood Hills Park?
I'm assuming yes. Yes.
Currently, we do not have a plan. Actually, our most recent, somewhat unpublic, not because we're keeping it from the public, but because it's not ready. But we're working on a management plan for that park, which includes management of an invasive species, particularly the French broom. So that's really where our efforts are going right now, is to look into opportunities for the invasive species. We don't generally do a lot of plantings in our native parks. So Westwood Hills, other than the program we work with RCD on at Alston, We don't typically do a lot of planting. Trancas Crossing Park, we don't do a lot of planting in those native parks. We try to keep those in kind of a native state. Most of what we do in those parks is we work on invasive species removal.
Um, Somebody was asking to, how often should street trees be pruned? And that may be a longer conversation, but maybe you can see if you can answer it.
Yeah, I mean, I can, generality is a 7-year prune cycle, but it really is going to depend on the species. Some species really grow a lot faster than others.
Okay.
Your,
People
your
are
oaks are going to be closer to that 7-year, your mulberries are going to be closer to a 1 to 2-year cycle, just depending on the species.
People are still concerned about the 1-to-1 ratio, and somebody suggested a 3-to-1 ratio for replacement of trees, which I think the more trees, the better. But like you had mentioned, Jeff, it really just depends on the area and the size of the area of what you can actually plant. And I'm not sure if people are trying to refer to something else that not necessarily street trees, but something else when other people remove trees. So I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate on the question or if that answers it enough for now. No takers? Okay. Well, I think we hopefully first if it's specifically for street trees, yeah, I think if you're only having a small space, you can't really plant more than one tree in a tiny little square box. So it would have to be a 1-to-1. And then if we want more tree canopy, we'd have to work with the private landowner to try to convince them to plant more on their private property.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to maximize planting opportunities. Trying to put a ratio to that is challenging because every neighborhood's different. A 1-to-1 ratio is a generally achievable ratio. We wouldn't want to say a 10-to-1 ratio and then not be able to achieve it. Rather than, I guess, look at the ratio, our goal, our internal goal is to maximize planting opportunities where we can based on our restrictions.
Okay. And then last question so far that we have left. What about Westwood neighborhood with the street repair?
Oh, the Westwood neighborhood CIP project.
Yep.
Woody, you might know a little bit more about this. I think this project has a pre-con. It's a project I looked at a while ago, and then I haven't really touched a lot. But Woody, if you have any information to weigh in on that project.
Is my mic working now?
Yes.
Oh, good. I do not have any information on it there, but almost all those trees are considered private trees. There is no sidewalk. The sidewalk will be placed on, I believe, one side of the street. I don't know if there is any plans for in the CIP to allow people to or provide trees to replant. I'm not aware. And to Jeff's point, I have, yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Jeff and Woody. We appreciate you guys taking the time to answer all these questions. And thank you to the audience. You guys asked some really great questions. Applause to everyone. And as I mentioned before, a recording of this presentation will be available on both the Napa Parks page and the RCD's YouTube page. So thank you all and have a great night.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.